kind of feeling for the room here, let's do a show of hands. Who in here is a professional website designer, developer, someone who makes websites for other people? Okay, great, great. So of those people that just raised their hand, who here is certain that all of the websites in their control are currently up to date? You know, a few, smaller number than the first set. So who here has seen a website that's been out of date? That's almost everyone. Great, great. So that's what we're here to talk about today, are websites that need maintenance. And this here is a screenshot of a client site that recently came across this summer. They came to me, and it was just a referral, someone who I hadn't worked with before, and they asked me, so I need some help. I want to add this, chat or tracking pixel thing to my website. Can you help me? And I said, okay, that sounds easy enough. Send me your WordPress login, and I'll take a look and put it in there. So this is what I get. I come in, I see there's, well, I don't know, should I just put the, chat pixel in, or should I, do a little more work on this? So this is when it came time to have a conversation with the client. And unfortunately, this is really common in the developer space, is that someone comes and finds you because they need help with the website, which is what they should do. Seeking professional help is one of the quickest ways to get started. And they have a website that's been neglected. And there's so many things on here. I've annotated some of them as far as WordPress itself. The core is out of date. There's plugins in here that are putting notices across the top of the dashboard saying, hey, I'm not configured. This is somewhat of a trend now where these plugins will throw something up and these notices so that you know that, hey, I need a little attention. And then there's other stuff here. If you look down the left side of the dashboard, you have all of the red bubbles with the numbers in them. So updates 15. So that's combined updates in here from plugins and themes and whatnot. There's a form in here that needs attention. You have 1,800 comments waiting for approval, most likely all spam. So we're going to talk about some things today that will, help get you under control with all these things. So maintaining a website is more than just clicking the update button every month. In order to have a well-maintained website, you want to make sure that your IT practices are in good shape. And that includes having a backup of your website, where every instruction out there, when someone talks about doing an update, they always start with having a backup first. Who here really does a backup before they start? Oh wow, about a third of you, so that's good. But then, besides updates, there's a lot of other issues that we're starting to see in the WordPress community as far as third-party software. And then there's other good practices as far as the accounts on your WordPress and checking for errors and other cleanup things. So let's start with backups, since that really is the most important thing. And in my experience, that's the most lacking thing in website procedures these days. So for the beginners in the room, a lot of you may not even know what a backup is. You hear backup thrown around a lot, but since you don't see them done, people have a question, what really is a backup? So a backup is quite simple. It's an exact copy of your website. And that exact copy includes all of the files, but it also includes an export of the database. This database thing is important because it contains all your content, all your settings. And if you're working with a PHP developer who may not be well experienced with WordPress and just is used to building static websites, then they may give you a copy of your files, but it'll be missing the database. And here I specify an export of your database because one time somebody sent me the binary files of their MySQL while the database was running, so those weren't consistent. It was just a series of indexes and not the data. So an export of the database is basically a portable version of the file so that you can move it around and restore it wherever you need to. So backups are really important, as you're going to tell from me stressing this. Just stop for a minute and imagine what would happen if you lost your website. You put a lot of work into your website. You probably spent some money on your website. A lot of you spent a lot of money on your website. So I'm not talking about losing it for 5 minutes of it going down. I'm talking about losing it completely. And there's a lot of ways this can happen, unfortunately. And all too often, if you look in support groups, if you come out to meetup groups, if you're active in the community, you hear about people saying, hey, there was a problem, my website's gone, can you help me get it back? And a lot of times the answer is no. If you don't have a good copy of it that a developer can read and manipulate it, then unfortunately you might have to be starting from scratch. So there's a lot of different cases when this can happen. There's human errors, and this is a good reason to have a backup. If you yourself are in there working on your website, you delete some posts, you hit the trash button when you didn't mean to, you hit on accident, but it was really important. If you have a backup, then recovering from that is an easy thing to do. I hate to say it, there are some bad developers out there, and shady people that you get in a dispute with, and they say, well, if the client's not paying me, I might just take down my work because it's mine until they pay me and own it themselves. So a developer may go in after the fact and take down your website to get your attention. That's a terrible practice. It shouldn't ever be done, but unfortunately it's happened, and that's why I mention it. And having a backup of your site in your control can, help with your situation until you can resolve whatever's happening with your developers. There are hardware and software errors. Software errors being bugs. Your site might be hacked through a bug, a security problem, and by having a good backup copy of it, you can revert to that copy while the site is being cleaned up. There's hardware problems. Hardware problems consist of hard drive failures, of server failures of all kinds, and it's not only the hardware failing, but it's possible, though you don't hear about a lot, that you might have a good redundant server, you might have RAID, so multiple hard drives going on, but you can still get file system corruption at the same time. So there's a lot of cases, again, you may not notice these up front, so having a backup is really important. And it's your best protection of maintaining your website and maintaining your business and having a fallback plan when problems do arise. So now that you know why you need a backup, how do you make one? And the best way to make a backup is to use a dedicated backup plugin. There's a lot of them out there, both free and there are a lot of commercially supported ones as well. So the reason you want one of these backups plugins is because they handle all the tasks. So I said you need both the files and the database. The plugins are aware of that, so they format it in a way that you can use it. There's some examples here of various plugins that I would recommend here that you check out. One thing about backup plugins, if you're evaluating them, don't use multiples at the same time, especially over a long period of time. What happens is that they're usually not aware of each other. So you may back up your site and it saves it, say a 500 megabyte zip file, and then your second backup plugin runs. It saves a 500 megabyte version. Then the first one runs again. It's not aware of this data over here, so it thinks, oh, there's just a new 500 megabytes. So now your 500 is a gigabyte. Well, this one's not aware of it. It sees a new gigabyte file, and you start stair-stepping up and start growing really large files, 10 gigabytes, 30 gigabytes, and you start running out of space on your hosting. So by only using one backup plugin, you're going to avoid those problems. So let's say a word about managed WordPress hosting. A lot of services out there that are managed hosting, like the WP Engines or the GoDaddy managed product, have really good backup systems built in. And because of that, they discourage having your own backup plugin running. But oftentimes, they're not banned from the system. So if you are with a hosting company and a higher up plan that has a good backup system and you're comfortable with it and you've practiced with it, I still recommend doing a periodic, say weekly backup, just to have a copy of your site, because everybody makes mistakes, and a mistake can be a pure mistake, but having a copy, it just is a good insurance policy for your website. So there are other backup tools out there that I didn't list on the first slide. These are more developer oriented. Duplicator plugin is really popular as a way to take a copy of a website. But when you're talking about backups themselves, I don't recommend these more developer oriented tools, especially for site migrations and copying websites. And the problem is that they're missing a couple essential features that a good backup system should have. The first one is automation. With a good backup plugin, it'll run automatically for you, so you don't have to think about, oh, I need to log into my website, I need to take a copy, where do I save it? And the saving it is important, because a lot of these tools that just copy your website will keep a copy with your current website, or you can download a copy. And again, I don't think that's good enough, because if you're not doing it regularly, then your backup copy isn't current. And if you have a problem with your website hosting where it goes away for whatever reason, then having a copy with your website does you no good. So then we move on to, how often do I back up my website? This is going to vary a little bit depending on the nature of your website. And we'll see a lot of people daily. That's a good default option. You can't go wrong with daily. But if you're not having a lot of activity on your website, if you're not selling products, if you don't have an active blog with comments or a lot of activity, weekly could be just as fine. Because if you're not seeing the change, you don't need to take copies necessarily of files that don't change. As long as you have a recent copy that's relatively up to date, then that's fine. When you're scheduling the run of the backups, this is when the backup actually takes place on the server. It's nice for you to do it off hours. You know, have it go at 1 in the morning, at 3 in the morning, at 10 at night. Do it off your peak hours, because sometimes, depending on the type of hosting you have, they're going to count all your resources put together. So you don't want the backup competing when your customers are most likely to be looking at your website. So spread the load across the day. Your website's going to be up 24 hours a day. If there's a time when it's less busy, then that's when your backup should run, and that's when all your maintenance should take place too. When you have less visitors, so that any performance impact of taking a copy of the website or the process of zipping it up or anything that goes on associated with that, then it has the least impact on your customers, your clients, your visitors. So I mentioned it quickly, but where should you keep your backup? And the answer is not with your website. You need to keep an offsite copy. Now, this could be to your local computer. It's a second copy. It's not with your website. The problem when you use just a local download is that your computer has to be turned on, and most of the time it's not automated. It's something you manually have to initiate, so you have to click the button and then click download. And the whole point of having a stable, reliable backup system is that it's happening automatically for you. So to have this happen automatically, the way to do it is to use another online storage system. And there's examples in here. And all these will cost you a little bit of money, maybe not all of them, but they're very low cost. And by using Amazon S3, Dropbox, almost every backup plugin will have FTP, which is an older style, where all you have to do is get an FTP account on a different service, and then you type in your username, password, host, and it goes across. Google Drive and the Microsoft cloud services are becoming popular, so you're seeing those features added to the backup plugins. And since backups are large, a lot of times your backup system will have an option to keep local copies as well as the remote copies. Once the copy of your site is moved remotely, I don't think you need to keep a local copy because it's taking up space and it's going to make your hosting company kind of unhappy. If you fill your quota, your website might stop for various reasons. So once you have a good copy, your first copy is your running website. Your second copy is the off-site copy. And if you're really paranoid, if your website's really important, feel free to take a third copy. Have a local copy that you initiate when you feel like it, to your laptop, to your home computer, but always keep the system running smoothly. Have the system going where it's automated and going to an online service. Now, here's the kicker. I hear backups talk a lot, but when people talk about backups, they almost never talk about recovery of the backups. And in my opinion, you don't have a backup until you've tested the restore process, because there are problems that can happen as the backup takes place. There could be communication issues between transferring the copy of your site from your hosting to your offsite location. You could be on a hosting plan where you're running out of space. You're out of space, so the backup software can't save a copy of your website, so therefore you're transferring an empty file over to your offsite version. There's situations where I've seen where it's not your fault, your account has plenty of space, your hosting company fills a disk, and therefore there's no space. Again, you're copying an empty file over to your offsite location. And then you need to test the restore process, because in the case that you actually have to use it, you want to have that comfort that you know you can. And by bringing up a development instance somewhere, either with your hosting on a local computer, with a developer, even if you hire someone for a couple hours and say, hey, my site's taking backups, I just want to make sure that they can be recovered. You don't know if you have a good copy until you actually load it and find out. So that's why I stress the recovery even more so than the process of taking the backup. You spend a lot of time setting up the backup, making sure that you're doing the right thing. So spend an equal amount of time to make sure that you can actually recover from the event of having to use your backup. So now that we know we have a good copy, let's talk a little bit about updating your site. There's a couple good reasons to update your site, and the WordPress community is actually really good at talking about updating your site. The primary reason you hear about is they say you don't update your site, you're going to get hacked. It's a matter of time. It's a mantra throughout the community, so everyone's heard this, I hope, and that alone is reason to update your website, is to get all of the recent security fixes, any bug fixes, then those are going to come through the updates. And the second reason is getting support from developers. And I'm not just talking with the guy who built your website. I'm talking about new plugins. As you're updating your system, some people might update the plugins first, and then the theme, and then the WordPress. They might be far out of date, but if you're not reasonably close to the same generation in all your software versions, then it becomes very hard to update. So recently I had to install WooCommerce for someone. They sent me their dashboard info. They were 2 years out of date. It was a WordPress 4.0, and they wanted to sell a couple products on their website. It was pretty easy, it sounded like, just talking with them. There was 14 products. I get on their website, the 4.0 version of WordPress, WooCommerce requires a more recent version. So I couldn't even begin to install WooCommerce because it itself was smart enough to detect that, hey, I'm using these new features of WordPress, so for these new features to be there, you have to be at a minimum version. So again, go back to the client and say, your website's out of date, we need to update it, we need to add a couple more hours to the project, so it's going to push the deadline, and it's going to cost you a little more just to have us get this up to date. But you're going to be better off because not only can I not install the software to move you forward, but there are a couple of security issues that we want to address to make sure that your website is not hacked in the future. And there's lots of blog posts about why developers don't like supporting old software and so on. The WordPress Foundation recommendation is to keep your site updated is the best way to keep the current version of the software, and so on. So how do you update? You log into your dashboard. You see on the side here in the blue area, there's an updates section under the dashboard. If your sidebar is collapsed, this might be a flyout menu, but there's an update section in there. This is your total update section, and on the screen you'll see updates split out for the WordPress core, for a table of all your plugins that need updates, and if you have multiple themes in your site, you'll see any themes that might be out of date that need an update. If you go read the WordPress Codex, which is the official documentation source for WordPress, and go in the tech notes, they have a wiki page on there on how to update. Their official version of how to update is to disable all your plugins, update your WordPress core, update all your plugins while they're still disabled, and then enable your plugins. This is a little tedious. I actually don't know anybody who does it this way. And I see a lot of heads nodding, yeah, that no one does it this way. This is a safety precaution in case if you update WordPress core, you have compatibility with a plugin where the programming changes, you might white screen your site if they're all active. So that's why they have you turning them off. The thing is, if you're relatively recent, in practice, it's safe to hit the update button a lot of times. If you have a good backup that you can rely on, then you feel even better about it. And optimally, if you have a busy website, if you have customers looking at your site all the time, do the updates on your development server before you move them to your live server to test everything out to make sure that there's no problems with the software. And a lot of plugins you'll find as you get to know your website, as you're in there, you'll start developing almost personalities for these various plugins. You'll start to find things in there, such as WooCommerce. If you update WooCommerce a lot, might require a lot of theme updates as well that go along with it, where a lot of WooCommerce enabled themes have special templates in your theme that enable you to customize how your cart looks, how your product pages look. So WooCommerce has a lot of updates on how the plugin manages those, so it's tied closely to your theme. A lot of those you may have to do in lockstep, where if you see a WordPress or WooCommerce update coming out, just mentally note that spend enough time, set aside enough time so that you can update your theme if you need to, as well as the plugin. There are change logs that come with the plugins most of the time, and if you can read through the change log, you'll see in there what has changed. Oftentimes they're easy to read even for someone who's not super tech savvy. You'll see in there where they may talk about they updated the language pack. So if it's a multi-language plugin, they may say, hey, we added Portuguese as a new language. Well, that's not changing the functionality, so I am confident that a change like that isn't going to impact and break the site. So that's one that I may update quickly. If it's a major version, say your plugin's going from version 1 to version 2, or version 2 to version 5 if you're way out of date, then that's one that you want to pay more attention to. You want to just mentally be prepared that this one could be a little more work, and that you're going to want to have time set aside, potentially do this on a development server where you're not impacting your primary server as you're doing the updates. For the designers and developers in the room who manage multiple websites, there are dashboard tools out there that make this much easier than having to maintain a list of sites where you manually have to log in each week and see if you have updates. These dashboard tools are great. Some are free, some are commercial. There's a couple examples on there. And this gives you a single page view of which sites of yours need attention for the updates. And also, if you're managing a lot of sites and for clients, these sites may send you emails when certain events happen. They may send you emails when users are added, when security problems happen, and for various reasons. I like to set up a dedicated email address to keep all of those in a certain place so that my normal business and then my automated emails are in two different mailboxes. And then that way, when I sit down to update, I don't need to filter between, daily project events versus my maintenance events. And the only additional thing with that is if you do that, make sure that you're checking this mailbox. Certain plugins in there, WordFence, are very noisy, so read through these, delete them as soon as you address them. It takes some good email practices to maintain the volume of email, but it's worth it just so that you don't miss anything important. And if you have unused plugins or themes, I recommend removing them. And the reason for that is every additional add-on that you put to your website is a small amount of maintenance that you're adding to the total project. And even plugins that are disabled, they'll still check and see if there's new versions out there. So you'll find disabled plugins that have updates. When you go check your plugins page, you'll see that they require updates. So even if it's disabled, you want to update it because hackers can directly access those files by calling out these file names specifically, and that's dangerous. So again, staying current with all the bug fixes even on your disabled plugins is a good practice to reduce the surface area of attack. In security, they talk about the surface area, meaning if you have this many add-ons to your site, then the hackers have this many opportunities to try to find a bug into your site. If you have a bunch of disabled things or things you aren't using, if you're using a bunch of unused stuff, then you have this many. And again, it's just adding to the possibility of problems that can happen. And with WordPress, taking out plugins, deleting them from your site, it's really easy to add them back on later. And question?
I'm familiar with this, and the question I have about that is, if I've spent a lot of time kind of, putting together different plugins, and then for whatever reason I decide not to use them, kind of leave them there so that I don't have to go think about that again.
Well, there's a couple ways. The question is, right, the question is if I'm deleting plugins, if I have disabled plugins in there because I want to keep them essentially as bookmarks, or if I've worked on configuring them and temporarily want to disable them for some reason, what do I do with them? Where do I put them? And there's a couple answers. If you create a WordPress.org account, then you can favorite plugins. And then when you search for plugins, you go into favorites and type in your username, and it shows you which ones are the ones that you're keeping a list of. I mean, I have my list of plugins, so there's common things I put on every site. Backup, WordFence. There's a couple that I use that are really specific as far as reordering WooCommerce products. There's a find and replace tool. So I've gone through, I've evaluated the ones I like the best for these various things. I favorited them. So now when I have to go search, I'm not searching from scratch, but I have my list of favorites and they're all in there. And even in the WordPress dashboard, when you go to add a new plugin, and you search for it through the repository, if you look across the top of the screen, you'll see a couple links in there. One of those links is favorites. You can type your username into your own WordPress dashboard and see a list of your favorites through your dashboard. So it's really handy.
Can you have your username?
Brian Murphy, first name, last name. And let me say one more thing really quick. So she can see which plugins I have saved in my favorites list. Because the favorites lists are public. And the second thing I was going to say about plugins and disable plugins and deleting plugins is when you disable a plugin and delete a plugin, for the vast majority of them, I won't say always because there's always an exception, but almost always, they save their configuration in your WordPress database. So what happens is that when you come back to install it a second time, it's still configured the way that you left it. So that's really handy, and we're going to see later as I talk about some other more difficult plugins. Sometimes a plugin, if you have to manually update it, it won't go in easily, and because it's going to say, well, I already exist in here, so WordPress as a protection method isn't going to overwrite an existing plugin. So, but you need to update it. So what do? In almost every case, it's safe to actually delete the plugin files out of your WordPress site, and it preserves the configuration. So when you put the update in, the update will detect. Most plugins are good at finding old configuration, even if they need to update their database schema. They detect that and are pretty good at forward compatibility. In front of you. So the question is, if you are a small business, not really a developer, where would you get access to a developer site? And the answer is that there's a couple ways you could do it. There are products out there that are designed to install WordPress locally on your PC or Mac, and you can use a WordPress duplication tool or migration tool to save a copy down locally. If you want to keep everything the same software versions as your hosting company, you can set up subdomains. So a lot of times, if your site is www.example.com, you can make a subdomain in there called test.example.com that gets its own website route. You would set up its own separate database. It would be a fully separate copy of the website, and that's done within your same hosting account. Almost every hosting account I'm aware of allows free subdomains. Some of the more managed hosting platforms have staging systems, and the staging is essentially a area where it's a copy of your website that's not your live website, so that you can make updates on there and make changes, experiment there. And yeah, and a lot of them have a one-button click where you can say, okay, take my live website down to the staging area, and then push the website from staging to the live version. And that one button click, really speeds things up, makes things quick, and then you don't have to worry about moving things around so much.
Can you download the backup and then test it on local hard drive?
Yes, you can download the backup and install on your local hard drive, and that's one of the best ways. If you're using a local system, a lot of times it depends on which local web server you're using, on how they set up domain names. But if you set up a local, sometimes they'll have you manage a host file, sometimes they'll manage a host file for you as far as getting the site name the same on your local as your internet version. And some of these tools have a toggle to switch from local to internet, because you do want to keep the name the same. Or if you're moving it from, some plugins like Backup Buddy have a migration tool where it'll take the backup copy and use it as a migration, so you can change the live site name for a local copy. So there's a lot of options there, and again, it just depends on the exact tools you have. Sure.
I use GoDaddy Pro, and I pay extra $2 a month extra for backup. Is that a good tool, or should you still back up on your own?
I'm not super familiar with the Pro product, but what I would say for my own comfort level, if it were me, I would have a copy, a relatively recent copy, separate from my hosting company in case of mistakes happen. And mistakes come in all forms, and it's not even done on purpose, but to have the own personal sense of security, having a copy of your website, if your website is important to you, is a good thing to do.
I got one more thing. I use a multi-plugin plugin, and it allows you to, I keep a Word document with all the plugins I like, and then put it in there, and it uploads all of them in one shot. I've got my favorites, so it's not a good tool to use.
As long as it manages your updates for you, then you'll be fine. Stay current with your updates. Your WordPress dashboard will notify you about a lot of updates, but potentially not all the updates, which is what we're going to transition into right now, is third-party software. I'll come back at the end for questions. So in WordPress, we have a vibrant commercial plugin marketplace out there. And you've heard of these. There's some big names. ThemeForce might be one you've heard of, but there's others. So there's no favoritism with them. And a lot of the more well-known commercial plugins are moving to just sell directly off their websites. And what you want to do is go into your website. You want to take an inventory, just like this gentleman said, where he has a list of what his plugins are. Take an inventory of what is coming out of the WordPress repository, the WordPress.org free repo, and which are your commercial plugins. And there's a reason for this, is that the updates you see on a plugin, when it notifies you, hey, I'm out of date, you need to click the update button on me, are coming from the repo, or a developer can do some extra stuff on theirs to tie update notifications into their commercial plugin. Not everyone has done that yet. So you may have commercial plugins, especially if you're on an older site, that is out of date, but hasn't notified you through the dashboard that I'm out of date. And you need to go visit with the source of that plugin, the original developer, the place where you bought it, and make sure that you have a current version if it's one that hasn't had its update procedure tied into your dashboard. Because commercial plugins have bugs and security issues just like all the free ones, because software is complicated. It's just something that comes with the business. So thinking that just because your dashboard is cleared, that of all the potential updates waiting for you, you feel good, make sure that you aren't missing any that are kind of just sitting in there stealthily that you're not aware of. And everything I said about plugins, the commercial plugins needing updates and may not notify you, the same is true with commercial themes. And if you do take a commercial theme, really any theme, if you're going to update your theme, use a child theme. There's talks out there in the community on how to set up a child theme. A developer could do it for you pretty quickly, even if you go to, say, a help me hour at a local WordPress meetup group. Someone there could set up a child theme for you. A child theme is a way that you can set your local modifications to your theme, but not change the original theme that came in. And the reason you don't want to change your original theme is when the updates come in, the updates are going to overwrite your custom changes. And you may hear from people, one of the reasons I don't update is I don't want to break my site. Well, keeping good practices is a way to avoid all those problems. And if it's a small change, then oftentimes your commercial plugin may have a section in the dashboard for local CSS modifications. So even if you're not sure on the child theme, it's something you want to put on your list for later. If you're changing CSS, don't go straight into the styles.css. Don't go into the editor on the theme section. Use the dedicated box they put in your theme if you have one. And the other thing to be careful about is if you have a theme with a generic name, let's call it Phoenix, there might be a free theme called Phoenix. You might have bought one called Phoenix. WordPress itself isn't currently smart enough to know the difference between the free one and your commercial one. So it will be checking the repo for all the free ones, and you may get an update notice from a different developer that your theme needs an update. you need to be a little worried about this. If you're using a commercial theme, there's ways around that, that a commercial theme developer can disable, update checks for themes to do that, but not everyone has done that. So again, having a good backup copy just in case if mistakes happen. Another thing I see from commercial third-party software is that they will bundle themes and plugins together. You'll get your very pretty commercial theme. One of the great features of it is that it comes with a Visual Composer style plugin, a visual editor that comes with the plugin, and that's tied into your theme. The theme has code in it, logic to say these plugins are required and part of my WordPress site as a whole. So these updates need to be done in lockstep. And what happens is a lot of these commercial add-ons that you're using, such as Visual Composer or Slider, Revolution is another popular one, they're unlimited licenses, meaning that you're licensed to use it on your site, but you can't get updates directly from the original developer. You have to get your updates through the theme developer. And oftentimes, the theme developer will push updates through the marketplace where you bought your theme. So you have to trace your steps backwards and do that. The update process, this goes back to where I was mentioning, sometimes there's a chicken and egg problem where you need to update your theme to get the new plugins, but the new theme wants the new plugins to activate correctly. And when you get caught in that situation, I've had to just play with it some, and I've deleted the plugins that are complaining out of the system and put them in fresh, and then they've preserved all the content, such as if you turn off Visual Composer, you'll see a ton of shortcodes in your content, but when you get the new version installed, activate it, your page is back to being beautiful again. So in addition to maintaining your software, there are a lot of other things that make up your website. There is your domain name is part of your website. Your hosting account is part of it. Depending on where your email comes from, it might come from your hosting company. It might be a Google Apps type thing or another third-party email service, which I like better personally. You're going to have webmaster tools tied into your site. You might have a CDN like Cloudflare, Content Delivery Network. You might have add-ons to your plugins. A lot of plugins out there are freemium, meaning there's a free version, but you've upgraded to the premium version, so they've given you a code to unlock extra features. You should document and keep a list of all these different things that you're using, and along with that, you should keep the URL of where it came from. You should keep the username and password that goes with that. You should, a lot of these services have backup and recovery methods for when you forget your password, and that might be in the form of a secret question or answer. Write those down, both of them. There are services that do multiple secret questions. So if someone gives me a secret answer and I don't know which question it answers, I don't want to have to guess 5 times and get myself locked out on accident. So by writing down both of those, you save that. Some systems have PIN numbers for calling support. At the bonus, record the email address and phone number you use with the service too, because when you forget your password and you click the I forgot my password link, it's going to email you where the password, what a link to your new password is. And what happens is, especially over time, is someone will say, I clicked the, forgot my password link, I'm not getting the email. Well, they used a discontinued account that they no longer have. They either changed their email address, it's an old Yahoo account, they changed home service providers from their DSL provider to their cable provider, so the email, they just can't get into it for whatever reason. So as you record these things on your list, when you make changes, you need to track the subscriptions to all these different services. So if you do change your email address, then go check where it is and update it everywhere so that you keep getting these notifications. There are important things that go to your email account that you don't think of that may only come once a year, such as the renewal notice to your domain, such as the renewal to your hosting. They may not be in lockstep. I had a customer that came to me. His website expired in March, and his domain and email are separate, so they're not in lockstep. they're paid in advance, so he's still running. His company's, small time. He doesn't check his website very much, but he checked his website one day. It's totally gone because he didn't pay his hosting bill because he just didn't see the notice, and it was completely deleted. We had to go back 2 years to get a version off from the web designer, and it was pretty bad. It took a lot of time, and it easily could have been avoided. And then besides your offsite accounts, you have onsite accounts too. So in your WordPress users area, you'll have your admins. And across the top, there's a section in here. I have a screenshot of a WooCommerce site. And in here, you see a lot of customers. But there's a link in here, a quick link that shows you the roles of the users. So if you have administrators, and especially at a company where you may have 3 or 4 developers, you may have someone at the company, you might have a third-party developer. You should give each one a separate admin account so you can turn them on and off at will. And then you should be, the other good practice of that is that when someone leaves the company, if you want to disable them, you can just disable their account. They don't know the password to everybody's account. And in this case, same with the shop managers. As people come and go, it's a lower role. But at the same time, it can change products in the cart. If someone, again, was disgruntled when they left, if they wanted to delete all the products, the functionality is there. So reviewing who has access to your sites periodically is a good maintenance practice as well. There are errors that happen in addition. So you have your site backed up, you have it all updated. So now all your IT practices are good, but say you update a new post, or you change a photo and the file name changes, but people have linked to that photo from other places. If you update your site and your sitemap changes, all your permalinks change, then you should be running a service like Webmaster Tools. There's other log systems out there that will actually spider your site and look for errors. And by periodically checking these, say once a month, then that'll give you a way to find out, from a user experience point of view, do you have problems on your site? And as new devices come out as well, new iPhones, new browsers, Microsoft Edge, even major changes in browsers. I just heard Firefox is going to start using Chrome's PDF viewer. If you have a site that has a lot of PDFs, you just check compatibility. Again, these are quick things,